Hello my good friends, this is Chaos Angel here, also known as Lord Omni, and I'm back at it again with another video discussion for you guys. And this time, we'll be going over the changes to the healers and the many things that I have to say about them in the current expansion. As pointed out from my Tanks Changes video, there's going to be a lot of shit to say in this one, and like a doozy amount of stuff that I feel need to be changed for the healers, not just in the mechanical sense. Oh no. Not even close. But we'll get there when we get there, as I will talk to them individually, starting with the white mage, mind you. But for now, let's talk about what needs to be changed universally for all the healers in the upcoming expansion that I feel needs to be discussed. And that's how healers will be when it comes to, well, DPSing. Now, to begin, since the major change from Stormblood to Shadowbringers, wherein healers were pretty much stripped of a majority of their DPS abilities to more so focus on the healing aspect of their role, I will say this change was quite the experiment to see how healers feel on how things work mechanically with the job that they were playing within various content built around said change. And this is stemming from the amount of damage enemies deal in dungeons, trials, and raids. To ensure that healers are able to focus on their healing, they've pretty much made many instances deal a lot of damage to facilitate, even more so when it comes to AoEs. There are a lot of AoEs in order to make it possible for healers to focus on their healing. And as much as I would like to say that this route that they took was certainly an innovation for healers in the healing scene, I would definitely have to say that I feel that, to me, it kind of makes the jobs in and of themselves a bit spammy, to say the least, which is why I would like for them to up the healer's DPS game just a little bit when it comes to it. Give us back some of our old abilities, or give us something new for us to work on when it comes to these jobs, just to liven them up a little bit. To get a better idea of what I mean by this, I'll explain more directly with each job individually. All I can say is that there is going to be a lot of talk on the use of gauges here, so bear in mind that I will be talking about this in bulk when it comes to each job's gauges, so bear with me a little. Another thing to add to this is something mentioned from one of my Discord members, Fia, which would be obtaining our first GCD AoE spell at like level 15 or 18, which was technically speaking stated in my last video if I remember correctly. I don't really think that it did, but it is more so apparent here, as it would get newcomers accustomed to the idea of like the whole single target for bosses, and then of course using AoEs for mobs. So it's like, at the very least, that will help out newcomers in getting a feel for how like endgame raiding or endgame dungeons work, and so on and so forth. Now then, let us start with what I believe to be the strongest and possibly memeiest healer out of the bunch, the white mage, or more so in this expansion known as the glare mage, as that is essentially what you do 90% of the time, with 10% being the heals, if you know what you're doing. This is quite easily the most overpowered healer in terms of healing I have experienced in almost 7 years of playing Final Fantasy VII, and that's mainly because White Mage's kit is so filled with healing CDs. It's practically, it just practically has no concerns for keeping up in heals as long as you manage them correctly. Like, no, seriously, this job's healing versatility is ridiculous, not only because of the CDs you have in your toolkit, but it's also stemming from the stark change of the Lily system from Stormblood to Shadowbringers. Like, the changes to the Lily system was quite frankly a godsend in the most pleasant of terms. Not only did it give you the freedom to heal with a CD, it also builds to a DPS skill, which I feel is the right way to go about using a gauge for DPS with healers and just tanks in general. But that's not the only reason this made White Mage such a powerful healer. It mostly stems from the fact that if used correctly, you will barely even find yourself like spending most of your MP with all the things that you can do to facilitate your MP spending. CDs that give free heals without the cost of MP. CDs that even give you MP regen like a size that also does damage at the same time while it's doing AoE healing. Like, my god, that ability is just so damn good. And to make things even more apparent than air, an ability that essentially lets you spell cast without even spending MP whatsoever. Combine this with essentially everything else, you effectively are the one healer who is free to go about doing anything that you want while it's keeping people up in terms of health. Like, it's just ridiculous. It really is ridiculous. Quite frankly, it is kind of just my go-to healer just because of this aspect, because I am able to engage more on the DPS while it's healing at the same time without even having to worry about my heals. It really is kind of I wouldn't entirely say broken, but it is really a just autopilot job, I would have to say. Now, although these things are great in and of itself, that doesn't mean that it's without any flaws, mind you. And my one problem is stemming for pretty much having so much in terms of heals. I really just have no worries in keeping up people and content. And, well, that is pretty much where lies the problem with the whole, like, glare spamming. And I would have to really say that when it comes to it, I find it to be monotonous. Sure, the occasional misery is nice and all, and constant holy spams are as much fun as they could ever be. I just find that there's more that can be done to make White Mage more enjoyable when it comes to the DPS side of things. And to start with, let's go ahead and talk about their gauge. The gauge, in my opinion, doesn't really give you too many options other than just healing. And I believe that it would be much more engaging to allow us to not only use it for healing CDs with our lilies, but to also use DPS CDs as well as along with Misery. Reason for this is due to the fact that you already have so many CDs for healing when it comes to it. So it's like you have times that you'll have lilies saved up that likely won't even be used in some situations, and this is why giving us like single target and AoE DPS CDs for our lilies will open up more options for us to use with our lily gauge, and it'll also help build towards Misery more effectively. It's all a matter of freedom of choice here on what we want to use at the given time depending on the situation, and I feel this would be the best route for the use of the healing gauges overall. Moving on, with the gauge topic out of the way, let's talk about some of the skills we have in general, like for instance, Cure. Now, I'm fairly sure you've heard this many other places, and you're gonna be hearing it here as well. I think it's time for us to go ahead and rework Cure all the way to Cure 3. Essentially, remove Cure or make it an upgrade to Cure 2. Just, I don't know. We have to stop with the whole entire free Cure nonsense, as these spells don't really get used much in the late game, excluding Cure 3 and stack AoE healing situations. But it's just like, feels like a mute point of using the whole free Cure ability with the trait, as it just seems underused in the midst of the late game. Sure, it'll get used plenty of times within ARR and Heaven's Word, but by Stormblood and Shadowbringers, there will barely be much of a reason for you to be even using Cure in any of these instances. So I would just like to see something along the line of like a tree of spells to be changed in some way. I don't know exactly how they would go about it. They could just make it upgrade to Cure 2 and that will be our go-to cure. All I do know is that whatever they will do, it will be a welcome change. It'll just be a welcome change in the long run. Now, skills that would be nice to have back, first and foremost. Arrow 3, please. Not just for the fact that it was a nice dot to have. It's just that the animation itself was sorely missed. I hate how it had to be removed. It would be nice to have it back in an unaspected rendition of the ability. I would very much like to see what they would actually do with that, to be perfectly honest. And another thing to add would probably be something along the lines of what we've seen in the benchmark. Now, I don't know whether or not if I delved into this too much, but I can't help but want to say a little bit more on this, is the fact that this could possibly be a change in Fluid Aura. Not really 100% certain on if the shield that we see in the benchmark is essentially Fluid Aura reworked into something of a buff or a shield, but that is sort of a line of thinking that I am having so far. In the long run, it could just pretty much be a new shield that is essentially an upgrade from Divine Benison, but as of right now, we just have to wait until we actually see the changes for ourselves. Other than that, White Mage is pretty much in a solid spot for what it is worth. Like, all it really needs is just to circumvent the holding of lilies over a given time, as well as just keeping us busy with more DPS abilities, as we just have plenty in the way of healing, in my opinion. Like, we have a lot of options when it comes to heals. It kind of just makes it hard for me to really think up what in the world they can really even do to add on to the job in terms of the healing spectrum. And well, speaking of healing spectrum, I think it's about time that we go ahead and move on to what I believe is kind of the weakest in the bunch in the healing spectrum. Let's talk about Scholar. Here we are on the job out of all three of the healers that I feel got the most taken away from it. Literally the most taken away from it. Essentially butchered. Realistically has nothing that sticks out to me as enjoyable to play within this expansion, in all honesty. And sure enough, I know I'm probably being pretty brutal, like literally brutally honest about this, but it's just like I kind of have a reason to, given how much of the job's creativity has just been thrown out the window with the changes it got in Shadowbringers. But to get into it, first, instead of like starting off with the gauge, which is what I would most likely start with to talk about said jobs, I really want to talk about one thing in general that just makes the changes even more apparent when it comes to this job in the first place. And that is the fairies. Eos and Celine. These two had so much taken away from it that I honestly feel it was what made the job interesting to begin with. It gave Scholar a blend of complexity when it came to the difference between the two fairies' abilities. Eos being the more healer focus of the two, while Celine giving the party utility by way of reducing weapon skill and cast time, among other things that sure enough may not really be used all too much. And yet, with the current expansion, both fairies pretty much do the exact same things. They're just purely aesthetic, which is quite frankly saddening. I just wish that they could somehow revert what they have done to them and possibly just rework their abilities in a way that will work out with Endwalker. At first, when I was thinking of changes that could be done, I essentially thought they could do something similar to Reaper when it was first revealed, thinking that they could change up Scholar to summon the fairies by the abilities they possess, which would then have them appear to activate said ability. It honestly would have been a good direction to go with, but from what we saw in the benchmark, that is unfortunately not going to be the case here. So, instead, given how the summons will still be separate AI and will still be pit AIs in the long run, what can be done to make them work without them essentially ghosting their abilities? Well, I don't entirely know for sure. All I know is that it would be nice to see the fairies have separate abilities again. There really just was no need for them to go so far as to just like remove their abilities and just make Scholar bearable to really play. It just really hurts to see how Scholar has just been butchered to this point. But in the long run, I'd like to see Eos and Celine be separate fairies with different abilities. Eos with her healing and defensive abilities, and Celine with her utility focused abilities. And you know, instead of giving Celine just a haste buff, she could also give a small crit buff of sorts. Though in the long run, that would sort of conflict with Chain Stratagem, as that already, technically speaking, have a crit buff giving to the party. I guess one thing that they could probably do is give us a small damage increase. Maybe that would be better? I don't know. We'll have to wait and see what would work for the best when it comes to that, if they were to actually go about doing that, as far as giving the fairies their abilities back. But it's just something that I've really been thinking about when it comes to Scholar, that I would very much like to see come back in the woodworks and to stay permanently, because this just wasn't it, Chief. This really just wasn't it. Other than that, let's go ahead and get into another aspect that I just feel like was pretty daunting when it came to it, and that is the fairy gauge. Now, this gauge just outright feels pointless to me, on the same level as freaking the soul gauge on Bard, all because it just does one damn thing: a more potent heal over time ability. That's it. That's all you guys could muster. Come on, man. So far since the gauge's conception, it hasn't even changed or has been expanded in any way. It just feels redundant, and I would very much like for that to change. As stated before, I want every gauge to have an actual purpose than it just being used for one basic aspect of the job. So it's like, give us some DPS spells to use with it other than just having it to heal. Give us a single target and AoE variant of a DPS ability. That would be very nice. And please, can we make something else be a requirement for gaining resources to fill up the gauge? It just feels like it takes ages to fill the gauge with just the little skills that we have from each Aether Flow stack that we even have to spend on it. I mean, seriously, that's Aether Flow stacks that we're spending, and we're only just getting 10 a pop. So it's just like, give us some abilities that can give us like 20 of the gauge, or even fill up maybe 50. That would be very nice. Just let us be able to have more use of the gauge. But it's like, don't just do that and be done with it also. Give us more resources to use by the gauge, so that there will be like more point to that gauge and a reason for us to use it in the long run. Because as things stands, nothing about the use of the gauge even feels fulfilling in any way, shape, or form. I practically forget that the gauge even exists, and I would very much like for that to be changed for the better in this expansion, please. Now, I think I've pretty much bashed this gauge enough as it is. So let's go ahead and talk about another ability that I feel that it was just tacked on for the sake of it. Now, tell me, has there ever been a moment where you thought, I need to summon Seraph now, when it came to every instance you go into with level 80 content? Cause I know for one thing I haven't. I know that I don't. You know why? Cause half of the time I freaking forget the button even exists. Like, no, seriously. Given how there is no build-up or actual need to summon Seraph, I have literally just have so many moments where summoning her was just at the back of my mind. Because it's like, what else is she gonna do other than the same thing that my fairy can do in and of himself? Like, all that it's really doing is just making things a bit easier for me to heal when it comes to certain situations that I'm honestly not really having too much trouble to heal to begin with. Sure enough, the toolkit I have has been carrying me pretty well when you know what you're doing. So why is it that it just feels so empty to really even use Seraph? I don't know. It just does. And I wish that wasn't the case. I mean, we literally get to use the fairy that is a part of our LB3. Of course we would want to use her more. But her overall function just doesn't feel as though we build to even use her in the first place. Like, we build nothing. We're just given the button to press and then she's just here. And I just honestly find it strange how that even is the case. One thing I really find strange is how they didn't even make the fairy gauge tied to Sarah from the very beginning. All they did was just handed her to us to use the second we got to level 80 and didn't think about anything further than that. It's just baffling, because it would have made so much sense for us to build towards summoning Seraph using the fairy gauge just to be able to have her in clutch moments. Shit, she could have even been the one to do the heal over time instead of our regular fairy. Maybe then it would have been some form of growth, maybe to like the gauge and by extension our character, but nope. Just give her to us outright, you know? Simple as that. Anyway, this is starting to turn into a rant with the way on how I'm writing this on this script at the moment, and I'm also going off of a tangent off of the script. So let's go ahead and get back to the subject matter at hand and focus on the wishes. Continuing on with some of the skills, let's just go outright with it. Can we please get rid of Art of War? Like, just get rid of it. Replace the whole ability or just rework it to do something else in the long run. Because all this thing does is consume Scholar's MP. And Scholar does not have the godly ability to say fuck MP costs like White Mage. So it really shouldn't be spending so much just because it does 20 more potency than Holy. For one other thing, it is slow as molasses. For the number of times Art of War is used, flipping 3 holies are already out and dealing damage. Like, are you serious? It just doesn't feel right that this, like, for this to even have an instant cast on a healer, realistically. I just really don't know why, but I would very much like for this to be changed somehow, some way. One thing that would be interesting is giving it an effect. Like, I didn't really say this at the beginning, but it would be very interesting for all healers to have an effect on their AoE similar to how Holy has a stun. So maybe for like, if they were to change Art of War, it would be cool if Art of War could have like an effect as well, possibly something along the line of Paralyze. That would be neat. Hell, They can freaking give it to Celine's old silence or something for all I care. Freaking have an AoE that gives silence. All I know is that it would just be interesting to give it something other than just damage when it comes to it. And, well, speaking of damage, now that I think about it, can we give Scholar back some of its DPS skills? Not all, mind you. Just the main majority that feels pretty missed. Like, for instance, Shadow Flare. That would be nice to see, having that back. I mean, it's not like there's any other job that doesn't still have their AoE damage over time attack. Just saying. Last but not least, let's talk about the MP usage and regaining MP. Now, as much as I feel that Scholar doesn't really need too much help in this department, given how it has lucid dreaming and so on and so forth, I still technically feel that it needs just a little bit more assistance in that area. So it would be nice that instead of giving us 500 MP when using energy drain, can we get 1000? It just doesn't feel as though energy drain gives us enough in terms of like a drastic MP gain. And really, it's just pretty pathetic. There really shouldn't be much of a reason to limit energy drain just because Aether Flow gives us 1000 MP by itself. That should actually be more of a reason for it to like also give us the same amount, to be perfectly honest. Because I mean, we are spending our Aether Flow stacks just to use the damn ability, you know what I mean? So it's like, let us receive at least that much from it. All the scholars would most likely be thankful for such a change to take place. So please, we would very much appreciate it. Now then, I think I've said most of what I really wanted to say on this job. I used to remember how this job was full of complexity back in Stormblood, and that it gave me moments where I had to think about my next move when healing, while at the same time dealing damage. It kept my mind busy, and I feel there should always be something that challenges you and rewards you for accepting the challenge to the fullest. And yet, unfortunately, Shadowbringer's Scholar just isn't that anymore, to be perfectly honest. It just ain't it, Chief. It's practically brain dead to play to me now. And I sure hope we'll get to see some drastic changes when it comes to that aspect. Unfortunately, we weren't really able to see much when it came to the benchmark, as apparently it was a shield bargain sale going on when it came to all of the skills for healers for whatever reason. But jokes aside, the next healer on the list that is going to be very interesting to talk about due to the whole shield nonsense, because, well, it's gonna be getting rid of the whole shielding ability that it technically has right now in this expansion. So let's go ahead and talk about the Astro, shall we? We've finally made it to the last healer on the wish list. Given how this is talking about changes with some additions, Sage will be part of its own video along with Reaper, as I have plenty to say about those two alone when it comes to it. So with that, we will move on to talking about our celestial sect of a healer, Astrologian, and the big changes ahead for this job, again, for that matter. Oh man, I swear, I feel like this job never catches a break. It just always goes through the most monumental changes with each expansion, and even within said expansions on top of that. It just baffles me to no end on the struggles Astros have to go through. But hopefully with this change in Endwalker, it will solidify and roll with the punches going forward. Because in the long run, I feel that it will work out perfectly as a pure healer along with the white mage. It will be interesting to see how their toolkit will reflect on this change, as it will be removing an integral part of its abilities that have been established for like 6 years now. We'll just have to wait and see exactly what happens. for now, let's just go over what I'm hoping for in the long run. So, to start things off, let's talk about the gauge and the card system. Just like all the other healers, I want there to be another feature that builds off of just doing like one thing that the gauge is typically used for. And in this case, the cards in their buff being visualized as like, I don't know, to throw like them on your allies as well as yourself. So capitalizing on that, another thing that I would like to see that comes to that is being able to deal damage like we used to in Stormblood with the Lord card. For example, Oriange actually had the ability to do that in the 5.5 Part 2 main scenario instance. And I will have to say that I kind of miss being able to do that, which is why I would like for them to bring that back, but with an extra bit of damage to stand on par with the White Mage. So, like for instance, when you draw the Lord of Arcana, you'll deal a potent AoE attack on a similar vein to that of White Mage's Misery. While at the same time, with the Lady, you can have an AoE heal that regens MP. That would definitely be nice of a change to bring back to the old Arcana system. I will be real with you, I actually really like that idea. How do you guys feel about it? Let me know down in the comments. But other than that, as to how that would technically work with the current card system, I unfortunately did not think that far into the system to come up with much of an idea for it. All I can say is separate minor arcana to have the desired effect that I'm asking for, and make the draw have its like own thing, as far as the same thing that it's doing currently, just so you can expand a bit on the gauge's uses. Though, to be real, Astro was probably the only healer that used this gauge normally than the others when it came to it. Still, it would be nice to have some DPS usage from the gauge as well. Now then, onto their other abilities. Considering Astro is going to be getting some significant changes due to the removal of Nocturnal Sect, we'll have to think up what will it have now as a pure healer. Though realistically, there probably wouldn't be much of a drastic change, as everything is all there for pure healing already. And this is all due to the Diurnal Sect. I guess in the long run, what I had in mind is that in some way they could go the whole Paladin route. I'm fairly sure that I'm not the only one who has said this, as Nocturnal Sect could pretty much be in a similar fashion to that of Paladin's Sword Oath, wherein it could be used as an OGCD shield, given its original effects, putting a shield on when healing. And well, from what I gathered, that is most likely what we'll actually be given due to what we saw in the benchmark, wherein my guess is that it is likely going to, well, literally be Nocturnal Sect in some fashion, given the whole lunar effect and design of the shield. So that thought is most likely good in retrospect. It's probably a solid idea for what it is worth, but that also makes you think, what is going to be happening when it comes to Diurnal? In some ways, they could probably make Diurnal Sect its own cooldown for pure healing purposes. We'll just have to wait and see when it comes to that, because I kind of had the mind that in some ways, instead of the sects being like stances in a way, they could essentially just be straight up cooldowns, you know? But anyway, getting to the wishes, I kind of wish they could bring back all of the time aspects that the job used to have, like being able to extend card effects and such. If not that, they could extend other buffs that, I don't know, maybe like their heals and their shields or something. Another thing that I thought of that would be very neat, harking back to the whole entire idea of healers having a effect on their AoEs. Gravity would be very, very, very cool with a sort of like, I don't know, maybe a slow or maybe a heavy effect being added to it. The only problem with that is that with the slow, it would clash with the tank's arm's length, so that can't exactly be used, sadly. I also wonder exactly what would happen to the neutral sect, given its ability with the wholly similar to White Mage's Temperance. I can't help but wonder what changes they will make to that, if they will ever really change it. They may just make the sect's cooldown, like I was saying, with one being the pure heal and another being like the shield as far as Nocturnal Sect is concerned, and then of course Nocturnal Sect just being the one in between with the similar effect of Temperance. It would make the most sense, and they wouldn't have to make any drastic changes overall. In all honesty, it just doesn't seem like Astro would really change all too much when it comes to it. All they would really just be taking away is just the shields. And speaking of which, that is actually another curious thing about the changes that I can't help but wonder. And that is Celestial Opposition and Celestial Intersection. Like, what would they end up doing for those when it comes to Astro becoming a pure healer? Like, I can see it just having like the same effect as it would technically have with it being in Diurnal Sect. It just seems self-explanatory in some ways, and yet it doesn't, like, with how Intersect does the opposite of the sect that you're in at the time. So there's still a little bit of a gray area trying to figure out what in the world they would do with that. Whether or not if they would just remove Intersect entirely or just rework it in some way. It is honestly up in the air on what in the world they will actually do with the job. Like, there's not really much that I can really think of in terms of wishes that I really want for Astro, but more so just what I really like think about what they will actually do when it comes to the job in essence. And that is kind of the reason why I don't really have much to say on what I would really like for them, other than just the bare minimum. I'll just have to wait patiently to see what comes to the changes of Astro. And I just hope that when it comes to it, that it'll end up looking very promising in the end. That's all I could really hope for. But with that, I think that's pretty much everything that I really have to say on this job. And what I look forward to overall. Most were obviously just theories and questions, given how there really isn't just much that can be said here, and all I can really even do is just speculate due to the big shift on this job's identity. But I will say, I'm going to be glad to see this healer be just healer focused, like pure healer focus for one thing. As it'll just be interesting to have two pure healers and then of course two shield healers. So there won't really be much of anything in the in-between for someone to be doing stance dancing, even though it was fun while it lasted when it came to doing that. But all in all, let's just hope that Astrologian will be getting some well-deserved changes in this upcoming expansion, my good friends. So with that, that's everything that I have to say when it comes to the healer side of things. It was quite a doozy, to say the least. I'm kind of out of breath and I really want some water. And even though that I don't really play them as much as I'd like to, that doesn't exactly mean that I don't really have much to say on the matter of their design in terms of their gameplay mechanics and tools. Shadowbringers has done more and less to these jobs that made some pretty strong and others pretty weak, and essentially stuck in the middle. So thankfully, with the addition of a fourth healer in the ranks coming in Endwalker, there will be a balance out in making things a bit more interesting in the healing department. Only just a few weeks away to see exactly what happens to them in this brand new setup. And with that, that's really all that I have for you folks. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please like and share to spread this discussion around so more can join in to share their thoughts on what they look forward to for the healers. And if you have anything that you like to share, put it down in the comments below, or even join up in my Discord to chat up on many things of the upcoming event and other things going forward for that matter. So with that in mind, you guys have a very nice day, nice night, nice morning, nice afternoon, all that good nonsense, and I shall catch you in the next one. Peace out.